Welcome to a special edition of What's Up Poland, where we talk about news and views and things that's happening in Poland. Well, this is my summary of a trip to the Polish Ukrainian border last night, late in the evening. I was at the border to check things out for myself and to bring some people back to Warsaw. So a friend of mine who's a filmmaker had been at this border point on Monday. And like a lot of people, I think he thought that there was no point driving because there've been reports in the news that there's no point going because there's more car drivers than there are actual refugees, which is hard to imagine when you see how many hundreds of thousands of people have come across the border. In less than 2 weeks, more people have come into Poland than ever came into Germany during the migrant crisis of 2015. Just think about that for a second. So the scale of the challenge is unbelievable. However, my friend had been there on Monday and he said that it was more than worth coming down because there were people who needed transport to Warsaw and to other cities. So I decided that after finishing my work, I would drive down. It's a 4-hour one-way trip. And I engaged the help of Damien Moran, an Irish expat who's been living in Warsaw for about 15 years, and a Ukrainian friend of mine, Valeria, who I used to work with, because I'd heard that apparently some Ukrainian women and children, as you can imagine, were slightly wary of getting into cars with complete strangers. And that's what it looked like at the start. People would just turn up randomly and say, hey, do you want to come to Warsaw? We drove down in convoy, 2 cars, making sure to fuel up because we've been told that fuel near the border is extremely tight. As it happens, there was a maximum limit of tanking up to 25 litres at the petrol station where we were. And at some point in the evening, we finally got to the point that we'd gone to. Now, we've been told to ring ahead because there is organisation at these border points on the Polish side, and that's as far as we got. But unfortunately, the number was jammed the entire time, which I was told is a good sign because it means that people are going down there. Within moments of arriving, we were met by an incredible volunteer, a Ukrainian guy who's been living in Poland for a long time. He spoke Ukrainian, Russian, Polish, and English. And he immediately said, great, you're coming to Warsaw, you're going back to Warsaw. How many people have you got? How many car seats? Okay, I'm going to find you families. So we were standing in the dark and it was pretty cold. I have to say within about 30 to 60 minutes, I was already kind of shaking a little bit with the cold and I was dressed fairly well. I've heard reports of people waiting for up to 60 hours or even longer days at a time at the border with children. It's not possible for me to imagine how miserable and desperate I would become in that time because 60 minutes was enough for me, let alone 60 hours. Now, there was organisation at the border, as I mentioned. There was food provided. There was drinks. I assume there were toilet facilities. There were police on standby. The atmosphere was, I would say, controlled chaos. So I'm not going to lie to you. There was lots of milling around, lots of different voices. And there were people of different ethnicities as well. So there was some people who were obviously African, some people who were looked from Far East Asia, some Ukrainian families. And we were asked to fill in some documentation, which we did. So I think in comparison to the early days, there is now a system. You fill in some paperwork, you put in your car details, your personal details, the name of your identity card. So we did all these things. And then there was a fair amount of milling around. But eventually we were assigned a group of people. We had a family of 6, a Ukrainian family of 5. Including 3 children who looked absolutely exhausted. I didn't find out what journey they'd been on, but I can assume and imagine that it was not fun. And 2 parents who also looked pretty exhausted as well. They went off into Damien, my friend's car, and in my car, I had 3 Nigerian students, Simeon, Simon, and Joseph, who are brothers and cousins, so part of the same family, and a Ukrainian girl, Natalia. Now, the brothers and cousins who had been studying languages and medicine at a university in Kiev, and they were telling me about their journey there. I'll tell you about that in a second. So we jumped into the car and then we began the long drive. I mean, it's 4 hours there, 4 hours back. So it's a fairly long way on some pretty rutted rural roads for the vast majority of the first hour. And we drove back. There wasn't much conversation because the people who were in my car were absolutely shattered. Natalia was heading to Warsaw Central Station to go to her sister in Wrocław in the southwest of the country. And the 3 Nigerian gentlemen who were in the car told me that they would be staying at a hotel and working on getting a visa to get to another country. So we talked for a bit and they told me about their journey. Now, there's been a lot of news stories about so-called racism at the Polish-Ukrainian border. And I think a lot of misinformed people have assumed that that's somehow on the Polish side. What I can tell you is this. I saw a lot of friendly faces, a lot of help, a lot of people willing to help in the controlled chaos that it was. And one of them was me. And as we were talking, I was asking them about their experience, and I can now relate that to you. So these chaps said that they've been studying in Kiev and they decided to come out when it was very obvious that it was wise to do so. Everyone's saying, why didn't they come out earlier? It's like, well, a lot of people stayed. So 2 weeks ago, I was hearing podcasts from renowned experts saying that Vladimir Putin's playing a game and it's like, this is just squeezing a little bit. It's not going to go to war. So I don't consider them to be stupid or naive not to have got out before then. They had taken a train from Kiev to Lviv in the western side of the country. And apparently, attempting to board that train, they had been held back by armed police or gendarmes or soldiers or militia from joining to allow Ukrainian women and children to come on. And from their point of view, they considered that to be racist because even though there was still space on the train that they were trying to get onto, they felt that the border force were holding them back and allowing more women and children on. They were able to use an agent, as they called it, to get onto the train and then proceeded to get to Lviv, at which point they took a taxi. This is all in the last 2 days. So I'm filming on the 2nd of March. And then they crossed the border. They said they waited at the border for 3 hours and they were made to wait in a separate queue before the women and the children, the Ukrainian people, the Ukrainian women and children had gone through first. Now, I'm seeing a lot of comments online about the treatment of these people. I can't verify anything they've told me, but I can relay to you their story. And I can only tell you one thing. They were greeted. They were greeted with hot drinks, with food. They were so full, they refused the food I brought with me to feed them with. I took them to the petrol station and they didn't want to eat anything. I was like, come on, guys, I'll literally buy you anything you want. And they were like, no, we were quite okay. We've got our bags completely full. I think what Poland is doing is the largest single mobilization of any nation to help any other nation. I cannot think of any, including during the Second World War. Now, that may be unfair to countries that really pulled the finger out and sent parcels over and all the rest of it. But the scale of what's happening in Poland is enormous. And it's an enormous privilege for me to be part of the country and seeing this happen live and even being a part of it. I know that one day I'll tell my grandchildren about what I did in this time. And I don't want to be the kind of person who secretly thinks, I could have driven down there and didn't do anything. We drove back. We got back fairly late. Not too late, but quite late, 8 hours of driving. I dropped off the guys first at the hotel on the way, and then I dropped Natalia off, and through Valeria, our translator over the phone, she thanked me very much. I hope that every single person who's ferried in these small cars and small minivans and buses who's coming over sees what the Polish people are doing. But if they can't see it, they will see it. Because on street corners, in shop windows, on statues, and in flag holders, they'll see the Ukrainian flag alongside the Polish flag. You haven't been forgotten, and you are not alone. And there's a small army mobilized to support you. In the contact groups that I'm involved in, there's more beds than there are people to actually sleep in right now. There's so many clothes and supplies building up. There's literally no need now to send a boat. Nobody needs more clothes. Literally, nobody needs more clothes. Supplies to get to Ukraine, you can look into that. I'm not going to go into that right now. If you are considering driving to Poland to bring supplies, then do check carefully whether they're needed. And if you happen to be living in Poland and you haven't yet actively engaged in supporting the women and children more than anything else who need our support, then I would encourage you to do so. Now is the time. And one day you'll look back. And not only that, the eyes of the world are on us now. There is a ray of light in these dark times. And it's white and red. I'll see you again for another episode of What's Up Poland.